Let's give a big round of applause for Michelle Conrad.
We're good.
Awesome. I'll take my check later.
All right. Thank you all. It's never a good thing when my mother calls. She's not the type of mother that calls to say, "Hey Michelle, how's it going? How's life?" No, that would not be my mother. Phone calls for my mother usually involve one of three things: car trouble, emergency rooms, or the police. And occasionally, if you're lucky, you get a combination. So last August when my phone rang and up popped Mom on the caller ID, I knew it wasn't going to be good. "Hi Mom. Michelle, it's your mother. Thanks for clarifying, Mom. My car's dead." "Mm-hmm. You know I need a car." "Yes, Mom. I know." "And you know..." "Yes, Mom. I know. I'll take care of it. I'll be in touch in a couple of days." Click. I sit for a minute trying to think of a way that I can convince my mother that she dialed the wrong number and didn't actually talk to me. Another minute passes, another minute. Damn it. Looks like I'm going to have to just deal with this. I'm lucky in that my sister deals with a lot of these types of phone calls, but when it comes to anything involving money, I'm the blessed child. The reward for being the most highly functioning child with a stable, good-paying job. I really got to learn to be less responsible. Now, I don't know about any of you, but there are a few things that I try to avoid more than car shopping. Let's see, getting a root canal, walking in on my parents having sex. Yeah, those are the only things I can think of. This whole car shopping experience is made more challenging by the fact that my mother lives in Virginia, and I, of course, live in Chicago. So I look at this as a challenge. Kind of like the Amazing Race. Can I get to Virginia, buy a car for my mother, and get back to Chicago in 1 week? Of course I can. Immediately I'm sensing good fortune from the karma gods. Due to a glitch in the airline's reservation system, I get a ridiculously cheap flight to Virginia, and I find an equally great deal on a car rental. My best friend invites me to stay with her, so within 2 hours, my travel arrangements are made with a minimal debt in my pocketbook. Of course, that's really the easy part, the travel arrangements. Buying the car will be the hard part, or so I thought. I start scouring the Craigslist ads, and I happen upon an ad that just instantly feels like the one. I call the owner, he's selling it for his mother. It's been well maintained, it meets my minimal requirements, and well, the guy just seems like a nice guy. We agree to meet on Saturday evening, and since he works right around the corner from my mother, he's happy to bring the car over to her place for a test drive. I spend the rest of the week continuing to look at ads, but I know this car is the one. And then suddenly, I'm hit with the equivalent of the Amazing Race detour. The guy calls on Friday morning and says someone else has come to look at the car, and is supposed to bring the money for it that day. "No!" I yell to myself, while at the same time saying to him, "I understand. Business is business." He assures me if the sale falls through, we'll still meet on Saturday as scheduled. I'm crushed. I thought I had this locked up. And now this means I'm likely going to be spending the entire 4 days in Virginia with my mother searching for a car. Perhaps I'll need an emergency root canal and we'll have to cancel the trip. But as it turns out, the karma gods were just testing me. The guy calls back at 5 p.m. on Friday to say that the other buyer couldn't come up with the cash, and so we're back on for meeting the next evening. I don't know whether to be pissed or elated with the karma gods, but I decide for the sake of my faith, I should just play it safe and be elated. Within 6 hours of arriving in Virginia on Saturday, I've completed the hard part of the race. The car's been purchased. He takes the plates off the car, we exchange pleasantries, and he's on his way. And I'm on the way for a celebratory cocktail with my friend, because now this means I get to spend more time catching up with her instead of haggling with car salesmen. Cheers. Sunday I had a leisurely morning with my friend, and plan on getting to my mother's in the afternoon to show her how to use the car. Hopefully it won't take more than a couple of hours, and I can be back at my friend's house with a glass of wine in hand. I drive over to my mother's, patting myself on the back for being so efficient and such a good daughter. I rock. I do. I pull into my mother's apartment complex, and suddenly, I'm no no longer in The Amazing Race, but instead in a Twilight Zone episode. The car is nowhere to be seen. And I have the car keys, so my mother didn't move the car. I'm looking all around, convinced that in my euphoria last night from closing the deal, I forgot where we parked the car. But no, the car is gone. Complete panic sets in. All I can think is that the guy that sold me the car must have had a spare key, and in the middle of the night, he just put the plates back on the car and took the car. Really, that's the only plausible explanation. I frantically run into my mother's apartment, yelling for my mother, only to find her fast asleep in her bedroom. Great. It's 3 in the afternoon and she's passed out. That only means one thing. Vicodin in coma. I start kicking the bed, yelling, "The fucking car's gone! The fucking car's gone!" She slowly regains consciousness, and I continue to yell that the car's nowhere to be found. She replies, "Oh, we probably should have moved it to the guest parking area since it doesn't have a parking sticker." Gee, you think, Mom? Within a minute, my mother's on the phone with the police and finds what towing lot the car is at. Now, I'm trying to ignore the fact that she has the phone number of the police station memorized. And the police seem to recognize her immediately. But really, it's not that surprising, given some of the other phone calls I've received from her. So now I have to drive my mother to pick up the car out of the towing lot, and she's going to have to drive the car back in her Vicodin-induced haze. I try to convince myself it'll be okay. It's only 8 miles. What could possibly go wrong? We get the car out of the lot. There goes the money I saved from my great travel deals. And I instruct my mother to let me follow her, as the car does not have plates, so I'm hoping I can hide that by following close to her. You see where my head's at this point. We get out on the highway, 55-mile-per-hour speed limit, and my mother proceeds to decrease her speed. 50 to 45 to 40 to 35. She thinks she's supposed to be following me, so is waiting for me to pass her. I'm suddenly thinking this is going to be the emergency part room of the story, when a car doing the correct speed limit slams into the back of me, and then I slam into the back of my mother. And knowing my luck, my mother and I will end up in the same recovery room. I pass my mother, and she then proceeds to follow me. And thankfully, we get back up to 55. But I notice my mother has the left turn signal flashing. How hard is it to turn off a turn signal? It's one of the few things that works the same way on any car. As I ponder this, I look up and realize that I'm about to find out just how bad an 8-mile trip can be. Yes, up ahead is a police car, and he's going to merge onto the road that we are on. And if my estimations are correct, and I did pay attention in high school math class, if car A is going X miles an hour, and car B is going Y miles an hour, how soon before your mother gets pulled over? Yes, the cop will end up merging right behind my mother, and I'm guessing at the very next light, he's going to pull her over. How can he not? No plates, and the left turn signal is flashing. Sure enough, that's exactly what happened. At this point, I consider my options. I could just keep driving all the way back to Chicago. I can't afford the one-way rental fee that Hertz is going to charge me. I could just pretend I didn't see the cop pull my mother over and just head back to her apartment. Or I could be a good daughter and intervene on my mother's behalf. Have I mentioned I need to learn to be less responsible? The three of us all pull over. I get out of the car and start running towards the cop. Not the wisest move. For some reason, cops are uncomfortable with people. I'm yelling, "That's my mother, let me explain." And he's just looking at me like the crazy person I have become from this nightmare. I explain the whole story to the nice policeman, and what was the reaffirming moment of this trip. He looks over at my mother, and then he looks at me and says, "Do you have a license? Because I really don't want to deal with her." Trust me, officer, I feel the same way. He kindly lets us go, but advises us to take the back roads to avoid getting pulled over again. Good advice, officer. We get back to my mother's apartment, and at this point, I'm emotionally spent. There will be no car tutorial today, only much wine drinking at my friend's house. Perhaps I can also take one of my mother's Vicodin. registered, plus teach my mother how to actually use the car. We'll start with how to turn off the turn signals. The Virginia DMV is only a notch above the Illinois DMV, and I end up having to go back twice because of their inefficient registration process. So I finally get back to my mother's at 4:30 and we start the tutorial. I suspect another Vicodin's been consumed. She cannot comprehend even the simplest of things on the car. For example, putting the key in the door. And I must repeat everything at least 3 times. My patience is wearing thin, so I'm thankful when I get a work call and I have to step out of the car to take it. I step out of the car and within a minute I notice the hazard lights are flashing. What is it with my mother and car lights? I finish my call, get back in the car and ask her to turn off the hazards. She has no idea what I'm talking about, which concerns me in a variety of ways. I'm starting to wonder if she should even be allowed to drive. Turns out the hazard light button is jammed, and if I don't figure out how to get the light off, the battery's going to die. And I'm supposed to leave tomorrow at 5. Let me tell you, there's no way I'm extending this trip for even a minute longer. We quickly head to a Honda dealership near my mother's apartment. Thankfully, they're still open. They have to order a replacement part for the hazard light button, which won't be in until Wednesday. At least they were able to disconnect the fuse box and save the battery. I paid for the part, because at this point, what's another $40? I look at my mother and say, I've done all that I can. You get to deal with this one. And then look at the mechanic and say, good luck with her. I return back to my friend's house. She has a glass of wine already poured for me, in anticipation that I will have another story to share with her. On Tuesday, I finally finished the registration process at the DMV by 11 a.m. My flight is at 5 p.m. I've watched enough amazing race seasons. I call the airline to see if there's an earlier flight. Please, karma gods, I've earned an earlier flight. And I'm granted my wish, the 2 p.m. flight. I board the plane and anticipate falling asleep before the plane even takes off. I reach to turn off the overhead light. And of course, the button is jammed. I just start laughing out loud.